Do you want to prove your RevOps expertise and stand out in a crowded job market? Then you'll want to check out the Revenue Operations Certification, built for operators who want to level up their careers. Accountants have the CPA, project management professionals have the PMP, and now revenue operators have the ROC. The ROC is based on the best-selling book on revenue operations by Stephen Diorio and is the equivalent of an MBA-level course on RevOps. With the ROC, you'll master the core pillars of revenue operations, join a cohort of your peers, tackle real-world case studies, and walk away with a credential that hiring managers and executives recognize. Operators from Google, Backblaze, eMoney Advisor, and others have already gotten certified. So what are you waiting for? If you're serious about accelerating your RevOps careers, check it out today at RevOpsCo-op.com. Hello everyone, we are here for the digital event today around mastering the revenue cycle, the key moments and metrics that drive growth. I am your moderator slash host for the day, Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a community of 18,000 plus revenue operators from all over the globe. I will drop a link to the community in the chat so that if anyone here is not a part of it yet, you have the opportunity to join. We have a lot of different programs that we offer, digital events like these. We have in-person events. We have a Slack group, newsletter, lots of different things. We actually just launched in partnership with Revenue Operations Associates a new Revenue Operations certification course. So there are now two options in our course catalog, a professional version and a foundations version. And then actually just this week, we also announced the location for our RevOps AF conference, which this past year we did in New Orleans. Next year, it's going to be in May in San Francisco, and we are going to do our Europe event again this time in London in June of next year. So you can see, where is it? Over there. I've got some information, RevOpsAF.com. If you want to learn more about that, we do have US tickets on sale right now. They are limited, only 150 available. Last year we sold 300. We're intentionally making it a little smaller this year. So if you want to go, get your ticket early. And with that though, I'm going to stop the plugs for the community and the things that we have going on. And I'm going to do quick introductions of our panelists and then get rolling on the topic and content of the day. So I have Steve Busby, who is the CEO of Revenue Operations Associates, and Ashmi Pancholi, who is a partner over at Revenue Operations Associates. Ashmi was previously the VP of RevOps at a firm, right, Ashmi? Lots of kind of expertise and knowledge there. Steve has founded several companies, revenue operations experts as well. It is in the name. That's all you need to know about that. But with that, let's get into some of the topic and content for the day. And actually, before we jump into RevOps stuff, let's just put a little, I don't know, faces to names. So Ashmi, why don't you tell us just a little bit more about you and your background, and then Steve will have you do the same.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having us. I'm so excited to be here. As Matt said, I've got over a decade of executive experience as a revenue operations leader. I've led large global teams at companies as big as GE and AWS, and most recently was at a firm. And I've really, before that, spent my career in other parts of the revenue engine, leading marketing teams and sales teams. And so I've spent a lot of the last decade talking about and leading revenue operations, working with C-suite teams and boards to really optimize the revenue engine and drive profitable and predictable growth for the companies I've been with.
That's awesome. All right. And Steve, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background before we dive into...
Well, my background is as a CEO, and I was always focused and fascinated on the operational side of the business, the people, process, alignment, clarity. How do you get the best out of a team, across a very complicated process? I guess it's in my DNA. I didn't know I was doing RevOps at the time, but that is RevOps if it's done in a strategic capacity. So after selling my last business, sort of said, hey, let's go help companies do this better, really master RevOps as a strategic discipline, use it as a way to execute, go to market better. And I'm, mission, and Matt, this is where you and RevOps Associates are aligned, sort of to elevate the entire RevOps profession from, more tactical and fixing things, which I know is crudely stated, to the most critical thing at a company. If you can understand the entire business, how it operates, and then affect change to make it operate better, there's nothing more important to that, than that to the C-suite. So we're super excited for those that are embarking on a prosperous RevOps career.
Yeah, 100%. And before I ask Ashmi to start diving into this slide, I have just a very quick rapid fire non-RevOps related question for you so we can learn a little bit about both of you outside of work. Steve, I mentioned our RevOps AF conference. What would be your walk-up song if you were the keynote speaker at RevOps AF in San Francisco?
Oh my
And then Ashmi, I'll ask you the same, and then we can get into our
Oh,
topic.
I'm going to date myself, and probably Start Me Up by the Stones, just because it gets
Okay.
people fired up. And I do think we're in early stages of starting up RevOps.
Yeah. All right, Ashmi, what about
Love
you?
that. Mine would be Money. I think that's the name of the song, the one that goes money, 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 that one, because
Yeah.
RevOps is all about money. We have to
I
bring
love
it
it.
to the business. So
Got to bring money
that's
in the
always
door.
top of mind. Yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
All right. Well, on that note, I guess on money and revenue, why don't you tell us a little bit about the
Perfect.
customer journey and why this is so critical and such an important part of revenue operations?
Yeah. So listen, I'm going to set the table here. This will be quick. I think we're all probably pretty familiar with the customer journey, but really the reason why we have the slide in here is to really make the point that in order to be successful in RevOps, we must have mastery of the customer journey and that full customer journey. And we'll get into that a little bit later in this presentation, in this discussion. But that's really the path to the C-suite, the path to the board. It's really understanding that full revenue cycle, all of the different participants that play within there, the metrics they care about, what those key points of friction, and more importantly, those key points of revenue leakage are. If we understand that, that's where we as RevOps leaders and professionals can have a massive, massive impact.
And just to add to that, I think there's so much emphasis on the financial journey, and perhaps people using financial metrics to imply the customer journey, but they are different. And I would strongly encourage you to really focus on the emotional and the customer experience journey, because if you can understand that and then make it better, faster, cheaper, leverage AI to do that then is going to enable the financial outcomes. But we see companies again and again looking at a churn metric, a retention metric, a conversion metric, and not necessarily understanding the customer element behind that. And I think for RevOps, you're in a great position to be able to do that. So it's just another spectrum of change that we'll dig into and tell you more about.
Yeah. And I think we take a lot of stuff, I don't know, I guess for granted, maybe when it comes to revenue operations as we think about it. It was one of those things that sounds really great on the surface and sounds easy. I'll say easy, like easy to grasp, understand, right? It's like, hey, you're responsible for, the entire revenue engine, right? Marketing, sales to post sales. Here we're talking about, the revenue cycle and like the customer journey. And it's like, hey, we boil it down into like those two words, right? The customer journey, right? It's all about how they, kind of hear about you, buy, and ultimately become customers. But it can be so incredibly complex, right? There can be, especially like in today's day and age, the way that people buy and ultimately turn into customers and then kind of stick around is just very different than and more complex, I think, than ever. And I guess I think the way that Ashmi and Steve, we're going to kind of frame things today is through this bow tie, sort of model and the different components of the revenue cycle, which is what I'm going to be pulling up on the screens here. So I'll kind of turn it over to you guys to talk more about that in detail.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point, Matt. There's more technology involved on both sides, right? The customer journey side and the revenue cycle side. It is really complex, but I think at the end of the day, customers are buying something or partnering with a company to fill a need, and they see some sort of value proposition or value creation there. That piece of it's pretty simple, and they, at the end of the day, ultimately want a really good experience. I think when we peel back the layers of the onion on the revenue cycle, which is what we're going to do here on this page, it's actually really, really complex, right? The internal to the company, all of the pieces that are in place in the revenue cycle, there's a lot of different steps and a lot of different departments, individuals, et cetera, that are involved. And that's really and we'll talk more about this, but the role of RevOps is to really drive alignment across all of that. And so when we think about the revenue cycle, there's really actually 3 core components. So the first piece is really all around demand creation. This is where marketing and BD and product, right? This is where they're focused. Like, do you know who we are? Do you know what we do? And do we have marketing campaigns and programs out there? Do we have BDRs out there that are actually driving demand and starting to build top of funnel pipeline? The second piece, and I would argue, and Matt, I'd love your perspective on this, but I think traditionally as RevOps has emerged, like this is really actually the second piece is where RevOps traditionally has always played, right? This whole notion of sales ops. This is all about pipeline acceleration. It's where sales and partnerships and your go-to-market teams live. It's where we're qualifying leads, doing discovery. We're hopefully driving outcome selling. We're doing negotiation, and we're landing the deal. And this is where we've in the past spent a lot of time in kind of the RevOps function driving activities to accelerate this. And then, yeah, go ahead.
And yeah, it's a bit backwards, right? Or it has been. And I think part of it was driven by just where the market and economy has been, right? When you could spend, a dollar to drive 50 cents of revenue and everyone was okay with that, then, that's going to be the main thing that people focus on was new logo acquisition. But especially in today's day and age where, the markets have shifted, there's a lot more focus on like renewals, retentions, expansion of customers, and then just different pricing models as well that mean, like you actually don't earn any revenue until people start using your product, or if you're looking at more like outcome based. So there's just a lot that goes on there. And I say it's backwards because I look at things, I come from a finance and accounting background, and like revenue it's in the name of revenue operations, right? Revenue is what you recognize from your customers, that what shows up on the financial statements. You don't recognize any revenue on your financials from a prospect, right? And if you want to grow, you need to keep the customers that you have.
But yeah, I think what you said is spot on, right? Like, and then we'll get to the third piece. So maybe if you could click through. So the third kind of segment of the revenue cycle is everything you were just talking about. It's relationship expansion. This is where, in software companies, you see customer success, your support team, your renewals engine sits here, your implementation teams. And I think to your point, right, customer acquisition cost, which we'll talk a little bit about later, has just skyrocketed. There's more competitors in most markets than there ever were before. So that cost at the top of funnel has increased. And so there's even more emphasis than ever before on accelerating actually the time to revenue, the time to value, as well as retention, ensuring retention and growth of existing kind of business. And so I think also I'll say organizationally in the past, at least many companies I've worked for a long time ago, this whole notion of revenue operations didn't necessarily exist in the form that it does today, because organizationally you had a marketing operations team, a sales operations team, and then you may or may not have had a post-sales operations team. And I think what we're talking about here is, one, the C-suite and the board, your investors, they care about this entire revenue cycle, all of the pieces, and accelerating that entire flywheel. And this is where RevOps as a function and as a profession, it's really about driving alignment and acceleration across this entire revenue cycle. Steve, I don't know if you have something you wanted to add here.
Just a simple point that the opportunity is to help the business perform better across chosen metrics, CX, financial, efficiency, risk. But in order to do that, you have to know how the business operates. So this framework, knowing from the very beginning, who do we target? How do we become aware of nurturing, transact, and then to what they call the back half of the funnel, which is post onboarding. How do we retain, expand, and grow, which is, I think, a huge underserved element of RevOps currently. But that's what we want to impart today, is that use this framework as a way to get that holistic understanding, and then your sort of optics for where do you focus, how do you drive improvements changes. And we really want to see RevOps, I know I'm probably overstating again, from problem resolution, what we call whack-a-mole, towards prevention and improvement. And when you do that through the RevOps function, that's where, from a career standpoint, from a compensation standpoint, all that stuff, the magic starts to happen. We're seeing it more and more companies, but by and large, the bulk are still sort of finding their footing of what really doing RevOps the right way looks like.
Yeah. And I'm going to launch the first poll because we started talking about complexity a little bit. And this poll is around, as people out there think about your organization, how many individuals are actually involved with a customer throughout this revenue lifecycle that we're looking at? Because the more complex things get, the harder it is to obviously manage and execute. And this will actually play into, as we're letting people kind of respond to this. Riley has a question that I want to kind of bring up for you both. So Riley's asking about what's driving the shift towards retention and expansion and away from just new logo. And I think part of it goes back to just the market and the economic climate. Previously people didn't necessarily care about customer acquisition. And if they were spending more dollars to acquire a customer than they were actually generating in terms of lifetime value or even just revenue, that was a perfectly fine trade-off that they could make because they just get more money, raise more money, continue to fund. And that was one way that they were going to continue to grow. Very different climate that everybody's operating in today. And it's a lot more cost effective, cheaper to keep your current customers and expand them once you have them than it is to go out and try to find more. So growth is still critically important, but there's different ways that you can ultimately accomplish that growth. And so Ashmi, Steve, curious how you'd respond to Riley's question.
I think it's a huge opportunity to answer that question at your company and to know what % of our revenue plan is from better retention, less churn and expansion revenue. And then you can say, hey, it is a quarter to a third, and it's really meaningful and underserved. That could be a huge opportunity, but it is a lot of just incremental focus. There was a stat that came out earlier this week, SaaS businesses, but that 55% of revenue growth is going to be from existing customers. And that rang a bunch of bells of people saying, geesh, we are under focused on that part of the revenue equation. So, they're going to need to send teams in there to do something about it. And RevOps should be, ready to go with the gear on. But that's what you should really, if you're not familiar with the right side of the bow tie at your company, go get familiar, map it out, talk to CS. They will love to have this conversation because they love being part of the revenue equation as opposed to the, just the help department.
I'll maybe just add 3 things. I think one, I'll underscore, absolutely. It's really all about CAC. It's more cost efficient to grow your existing customer base. However, I'll also say that it really depends on the stage of the company, having been at companies at different stages in their growth, as well as phases of growth. Like there's going to be times where you really do want to focus more on growing existing customers, that upsell cross-sell motion. And then there's going to be times if you're an earlier stage company, it has to be all about new logo acquisition. Like you need to actually build to the point where you can have a really strong kind of post-sale customer success motion. And then the third piece I think about it, in addition to what Steve just said about the metrics, is I'd also think about the culture and the people and the skills. Because I will say, having also been in many companies that have gone through and I've led the shift to this, the upsell cross-sell motion and the kind of NRR growth motion requires a very specific skill set within that post-sale team. And it may not, that's something you need to actually, probably another question you need to ask is like, if that's where we want to drive revenue growth from, one, do we have the right kind of capabilities and skill sets and roles on the team to go do that effectively? And if not, then what does that mean we need to do? What does that role look like? What does that org structure look like? So that's maybe just another question I would encourage you all to ask, in addition to kind of the question around metrics.
Yeah, 100%. And again, as we were talking about career growth, moving up to the C-suite, being at the executive level, understanding how this entire thing works, super important, but also in your current role today, think about the work that you do and how that maps to maybe the different elements of this bow tie. Because again, that can help you figure out where you actually have impact experience, where you may want to get more experience, start to work on other projects, things like that. Because truly having this end-to-end view and understanding is super, super critical to career growth. And I guess Ashmi, Steve, I'm sharing the poll results now. I'm going to pull them down, but it looks like no one said less than three. Three or less are involved. Everyone's four plus people that are kind of interacting throughout the customer or the revenue cycle. So are you surprised by that? Thought it'd be more
No, it just
weighted?
reinforces involves handoffs and teamwork where there's going to be friction and process inefficiencies. So those are those little, as it goes along that journey and those people get the baton, that's RevOps is saying, hey, it's working or could be better, and here's a plan.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I think this reiterates the fact that it is really complex, right? But we actually don't want our customers to feel that complexity, right? We want them to have a really superior, seamless customer experience. And so this is really both the challenge and the opportunity for RevOps, right? You can see some of the metrics here on the page that are actually quite staggering, right? When we have this complexity and it's not managed effectively and we're not driving alignment and this kind of seamless customer experience, this is where there's massive kind of negative downward impacts to revenue, right? You've got deals stalling, you've got impact on customer satisfaction scores, which will ultimately impact your NRR, your retention rates and renewal rates. And so I think the net of it, this is just adds more to why RevOps and the role of RevOps is so critical in driving a superior customer experience through operationalizing that revenue cycle in a really seamless way.
Yeah. And things are never going to get things are always going to be, things are just going to get more complex, right? So it's like you can never eliminate the complexity, but I guess to the point here is how can you manage that effectively? And even as you think about different solutions and ways that you can have an impact, like how many times have we all looked at a solution to like what seems to be a really big, hairy, complex problem? I know like I'm always most impressed by the elegance of the simple solutions that solve those
Mhm.
complex problems, and that is really where like a true operator shines and does
Yeah.
really, really well.
And one thing I often ask in the roles I've had is like, are we selling our org chart? Like that's not something you want to do. And so one suggestion I would have to everyone on this call is if you're not already doing this, go attach yourself to some deals and be a fly on the wall. You don't even need to participate, but really understand what it like almost feels like to interact with your company or your organization from a customer lens. And I can tell you when I have done that in the past, you can quickly realize if you're showing up as a team aligned and creating a good experience for the customer, or if you're really, quote, selling your org chart where handoffs are really messy, it's not really making sense from a customer perspective because, your customers they don't see your org chart. They don't understand that piece of it. They just understand they want to buy. They have a need they're trying to solve through something you're trying to sell them. So that's one tip I'd have for everyone. So this page here really, the bottom piece of it, and I think there's some builds here, Matt, you can just go through them. It really just highlights like this is the role of revenue operations. We sit underneath this entire revenue cycle, and our job is to really optimize it, right? To Steve's point, proactively driving strategic direction, driving cross-functional alignment across all of these pillars and all the roles that are responsible for the different pieces of the job within the revenue cycle. What I like to say a lot, we're creating a single thread of data, process, tooling and automation, single thread of metrics as well, of incentives so that everyone in the organization is aligned and we're all talking the same language and we're all coordinated, right? That's what creates this flywheel of efficiency and I think ultimately predictable, profitable growth. And it's critical that we understand each piece of this. And I think we'll get to it in the next page. Like there are critical points of this journey where if we're misaligned, one, it's massive opportunity for RevOps to go address it, but really it's driving inefficiency and revenue leakage for the company.
Yeah. And question for Ashmi, for you and for Steve, actually. So Aiden was asking this in the Q&A, and this gets into a little bit on the role of RevOps and the way to structure teams. And Ashmi, you hit on this a little bit of as companies grow, mature, different things are going to be important. And actually, I would say even as companies grow, I mean, you can have different goals, objectives quarter to quarter, year to year. So maybe in some cases,
Yeah.
something like new logo acquisition is going to be super important. Definitely as companies are in that first stage of their life cycle, new logo acquisition is going to be a primary channel for growth. So if growth is what you're looking to accomplish, then new logos is a way to do that. As you maybe grow and mature, other things like renewal, retention, NRR, expansion revenue is going to be more important. So I know things will vary depending on size, stage of company, but Aiden was asking what the kind of world-class revenue operations teams look like. Specifically, how are they structured, and how do things look different from, startup, maybe in the 5 to 10, $15 million range versus
Yeah.
a much larger org that could be 300 million plus. And I know there's going to be tons of like, it depends on this, but what would be different ways to think about the structure?
Yeah, I mean, I've having led the transformation of RevOps orgs, not quite that small, but kind of the evolution of them, what I'd say is one, when you're smaller, you're going to have more generalists. You need generalists. You need people who are analytical, are technical enough from a tooling standpoint, but also kind of strategic and can understand the business because you're just they need to build the foundations. As you start to grow and evolve, this is where you start to get specialized functions within RevOps. And Steve and Matt, please chime in and love your perspective on this as well. But this is where what I've seen and done is you start to get specialization. You've got folks who are then solely focused on strategy and planning and field operations. You've got people who are solely focused on analytics, solely focused on systems and tools, like just solely focused on variable compensation, solely focused on enablement. And then, the role of a RevOps leader is to really help connect the dots across all of those things across this revenue cycle to drive the outcomes as aligned with the goals of the business. And then I think maybe some of what Aiden is also talking about is like the DNA of the types of people you want to hire, right? And this is something that I've always focused a lot on. And I think regardless of stage, right, you want to hire people who either already have the skills or have high potential to gain the skills of, you have to have some analytical and technical chops. Like you don't have to go be deep into coding necessarily if you're not going to go sit, or development if you're not going to go sit on a business systems or revenue systems team, but you have to be analytical enough for really any role in RevOps. You have to be strategic and consultative. Like, so in my career, I have often, balanced out my teams by hiring former consultants or people who have been consultants in the past, because a lot of what RevOps is ultimately doing, especially as the business, matures, is you're essentially a consultant to the marketing team and the CMO, or to the VPs and segment leaders and market leaders if you're talking about sales, right? Same on the CS side. Like you have to be able to not just bring the data and like process to bear and go through kind of the nitty gritty. You need to actually be able to communicate it in a way that's almost exec ready, really succinct, has the so what. And then I think the third thing is you need people who like this whole notion of continuous improvement. Like RevOps is not a job, and I think it says this on this page, it's not a job that's like ever done, right? Like what your perfect forecasting process last year may no longer be the perfect forecasting process next year because your business has changed or something has changed. And so this, like, you need people who want to like continually improve. So I don't know if that fully answers the question. I know Steve, Matt would love your perspective. That's how I think about it.
Just a slightly different twist on it, but think about the evolution, which Ashmi talked about, which is sort of bottoms up, right? We need sales enablement, marketing, so these, fit for purpose things, but that's very different than a top down. What is our strategy? So good organizations, and I would encourage you to sort of find a champion, or you be that champion that says, yeah, marketing has a strategic plan, sales has a strategic plan, RevOps needs a strategic plan that defines the mandate. and says what it's about, where we're going to focus, how we're going to do it, how we're going to be measured, and drive it. Because right now it is just a lot of very good, but not necessarily extremely coordinated. I mean, Ashmi's done this and she led that and did it. So it can be done. But if you're at a company where it's not clearly defined and it is, again, sort of function by function, good work happening, then I think that's a big opportunity to sort of change that evolutionary dynamic. It helps if you're starting from scratch, for sure, but at legacy companies that can be done as well.
It's a good point, and
Yeah.
I would argue most companies, like I still to this day spend a lot of time talking about like what is RevOps, what is the value, what does it do, like the board, the C-suite, like there's still a lot of education that needs to be done. So I think that's a really excellent point, Steve.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to launch our second poll, which is talking about AI. So, as we think about, and we're going to get into some of this stuff next, which is why we're asking about this now. So, as we start talking about AI replacing some basic RevOps activities, we're talking things like CRM cleaning, data hygiene, maintenance, reporting, analytics, lead scoring, enrichment, lots of different things. Kind of how worried are you? We're looking for a ranking here. One, not worried at all. One, very worried. Five, not worried at all. So I'll give some people some time to answer this, and then I'll just hit on kind of this last question. All right. So question, Ashmi, for you first, because you mentioned as people think about like growing your team, your RevOps team. So do people think about it? Should people think about it from a perspective of analytics, systems, strategy, and those are the roles that people are playing, or do you place people in like sales ops, marketing ops, CS ops? Like parts of this bow tie sort of dedication where maybe it's part systems, part analytics, part strategy. How should people be thinking about that?
Yeah. I think it really, it depends on the scale of the business and how your business goes to market. I think there are horizontals that are really critical in any kind of more mature RevOps organization. In my perspective, that's analytics, that's horizontal across. It's business systems and technology that's horizontal across. And there's probably some level of like strategy and planning that's horizontal across, thinking about the entire life cycle. It's really when I start to think about like quote field operations, the individuals on my team that are embedded or partnering with each of the leaders or segments or markets, that's where we're more aligned, and typically either more aligned marketing versus CS versus sales. Sometimes, I've had organizations where there's no differentiation between sales and CS ops because we go to market in a way that's by segment or market, and both of those teams are together. And so we're really thinking about having that kind of field ops team or field ops resource aligned to that segment or markets. They're thinking about ultimately their goal is the same goal that that segment or market team has from a revenue perspective, and they're driving the kind of operational execution of that. So that's the way I think about it. Curious, Matt, what you'd say, or if you've seen it differently.
No, I think that's I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I think it's
Yeah.
going to depend on part of it depends on you as a leader, where your skills land. Part of it lands on as your company grows, who have you hired? How have they grown or evolved in their own skill set? And I think different things can work for different companies. So I don't think there's necessarily a right or a wrong answer there. I think you just need to think through it, that there are different approaches, right? There's not one size fits all that's going to
Yeah,
work.
that's right. I'd
All
agree.
right, so I'm sharing the poll results. Looks like what? Most folks are landing in this like, I don't know, not worried at
Hmm.
all. Or
Is
at
that,
least,
yeah, I want to make sure that scale of 5 is not worried,
yeah,
very worried.
yeah, not worried. One being the very worried. And I guess if anyone answered with the opposite scale in mind, let us know. But it seems like most folks at least are in the camp of like, hey, it's here, but I'm not worried about it replacing all the things that we do. So I don't know if that surprises you all. I mean, what do you think?
I'm a little surprised because I do think it is a value creation opportunity to do some of the things if there is around, CRM hygiene or reporting or analytics or things that AI would through training could do to free up time for some of this value add, more strategic diagnostic driving change. So my going in hypothesis was that AI could be a great thing for RevOps, and sort of advising that people should be looking at what they do and saying, how can I AI-itize a portion of it to be able to make that leap in transformation? That it's a great avenue. But
Yeah. And maybe the key word here is, at least in our question, was worried. I think maybe people would agree with you, Steve, where it's like, hey, I'm not worried because I see the opportunity, right?
Yeah.
It is going to do those things that allow me to focus on the things that matter. And actually, I think that's probably what we're getting into a little bit here is some of the metrics that matter, how people can think about measuring their effectiveness, and the company's effectiveness, right, across this revenue cycle.
Yeah, we're pressed for time, so we'll go quick. But the point here is just know that everything along the revenue cycle can be quantified. There is a metric, and you should know all of these metrics because it is the common language. It aligns you with what's important for that particular function or for that particular stage. So if you go through this and check or question mark by things that you're already an expert in, or hey, I need to do a little bit more digging, but this is sort of learning. You got to know this math if you are going to be able to diagnose a business, and where can we change? How do I structure that change? How do I quantify it and show to management, what the benefits were? And it's both the top, right? This is the business performance metrics, but also things at the bottom around return on investment, program performance, uptime, onboarding. This is sort of that operational stuff, but so that's also critical in addition to just the conversion, one rate, churn rate, all the expansion revenue, all the stuff that you probably know pretty well already.
Yeah. Ashmi, how does this, when you were VP of RevOps, is this, 100% coverage of all the things that you were tracking?
It's a lot of them. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty in line. And I would say we were tracking them. We weren't measuring necessarily or operating our business along all of these things, right? We always tried to drive some focus in our operating mechanisms to focus on like the most important or key metrics, but these are absolutely the things that we were tracking to ensure or to really catch and inspect whether we saw, if there was leakage or see around the corners of whether there was inefficiency.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. And so talk us through then kind of as we look at the same bow tie here. We've taken some of these things off and maybe have highlighted a couple.
Yeah, we sort of said if we got a short attention span or bandwidth, which do we focus on? So we highlighted 7 that we would say become an expert if you're not already, but working through them just real quickly. The ideal customer profile, getting that right. We go into companies again and again and again, and it's either not clear or it's inconsistent between sales, marketing, and CS. It aligns everything. And if you don't have alignment on your ICP, then you've got a lot of downstream mess. And I heard a good quote from a consulting firm the other day that was like, if your customers are not expanding, if they're not growing, you do not have your ICP right. And I think there is a lot of truth in that. But for RevOps to be able to validate who is it correct? Are we focused? Are all the GTM teams in agreement? Because that's the centerpiece of how everything flows from that. And this is a great one, AI, in terms of validating that and incorporating some third-party data into who is it, what signals. That is a valid AI use case that we're seeing successfully deployed around ICP, definition and monitoring and engagement.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just want to add, Steve, on that. I feel like actually if everyone asked different teams at their companies right now,
Yeah.
2 questions: what is our ICP and what's the definition of a customer? I 100% guaranteed are not going to get the same answers across different teams. Everyone's going to have different answers to those questions within your same company. Guaranteed.
1,000%. Yeah, 1,000%. I've seen it happen. And even more so if you're in a company that's multi-product or has a GM model. And each GM or each product area probably has their own definition of an ICP, and your sales team has probably a very different definition of an ICP. And I think what Steve said is spot on. Like, it all starts and ends with that. If you don't have that correct, it has downstream impacts on even how you're structured and how you go to market, right? Like, those are some really key decisions that any company makes that's anchored on really understanding that ICP. And so if you don't have that right, that's a problem. But it's also an area where RevOps can add a lot of value in that interlock
Absolutely.
with
That's why
product
it's
management. Yeah.
tip of the spear. And I think, again, speed up, but the second one here on sales accepted lead point here is that should be your ICP. So if sales said, this is exactly what I want you to bring to my doorstep and drop off, great. That's the ICP. Marketing, go find these people and just shrink that top of the funnel. I see so many, complicated lead stages and different qualified levels, but just go right to what does sales want. Marketing, great. Let's enable you to go get those and deliver them. And then sales, how many of those do you then convert? But that's why, highlighting it as one of those just key gatekeeper metrics to make sure you have right. Everyone should know customer acquisition cost. If you don't, calculate it, have some fun, go work with finance, but you need to know that. You need to know the unit economics. If you don't, what's your lifetime value relative to the cost to acquire? That's the stuff that if you can understand and communicate and then affect change to make better and show those numbers to the C-suite, that's how you ride the wave north. Retention and churn we talked about, but get in that engine under the hood if you're not already. Hugely powerful economics once you start talking about going from 70 to 75%, or you can do that revenue math, but that's the math again that gets everyone saying you can do that. Even if you do half of what you say you're going to do, that's a material impact on the bottom line. So absolutely, I'll champion that project. NRR is not just for SaaS companies. It's just the concept of keeping what you have, growing that, and limiting what you lose. So whatever metric is appropriate for your company, it should be tattooed, so to speak, and used to drive measurement and change. And then the bottom, just real quickly, develop a sense of return on assets or return on investment. Most companies are not good at or honest about doing this. It can be a little tricky, but what did we spend on this campaign? What do we spend deploying this technology? What was the return, positive, negative? What was the time frame over which it was realized? I mean, that's the math that, investment banks and PE firms do to decide, but it's very applicable for RevOps, even if it's done a little bit crudely, for you to say, yeah, this is great, positive, we all agree, let's do more. This best intentions, but it was a dud, and let's learn and move on. And then last point, just if you don't know basic accounting, if you don't know an income statement, balance sheet, it's absolutely essential to RevOps, because everything you do directly drives an expense or revenue that impacts net income. And you're 1 degree away from here's what I did, here's how it impacted that. That's what the C-suite cares about, drives valuation. So you want to self-advocate and be able to link your focus, your effort, your good work with what was that impact in the financials, and a good, get the CFO and team, rallying, supportive if they're not. But that's, again, these unifying ways that you can really link and make the power of RevOps more visible.
Yeah. And the key, I'm going to launch our kind of last poll here, which will kind of hit on some of the things we're going to get into. I think the key thing that you mentioned there, Steve, on doing some of this math, you said the word crudely. And I just want to highlight that. Like, don't feel, especially if this stuff is relatively new, you don't need to round out to the 7th decimal point on this stuff, right? Like, start doing it and understanding it. And that's a great way to just get rolling. Crudely is okay.
Yeah.
Crudely is okay. So, all right. So this next poll, go ahead and answer. Rate your company's ability to diagnose and drive meaningful cross-functional change along the revenue cycle. 1 being poor, 5 being excellent. We'll give people a little bit of time to answer this, and then Steve and Ashmi, I'll let you go into kind of these 4 key points of failure as we're doing that, and then I'll share the poll results here in about 30 seconds or so.
Cool. So we can go through these pretty quickly, but really this page is to really illustrate as we think about as we think about the revenue life cycle, there's really 4 key areas where this is where there tends to be massive misalignment. I call them the key points of failure. It's where we see a lot of revenue leakage. Conversely, though, it's also the areas where, as a RevOps professional, this is where you should focus because you're going to find a lot of opportunity to make massive impact if you actually dig into each of these at your own company and see where the current processes are broken. The first one is product and go-to-market misalignment. There's a case study I'll walk through that talks to just this, where product maybe has a different view of the ICP than go-to-market teams do, or they haven't fully baked the product before they've launched it and set targets against it. The second is opportunity handoff, and this is where your BD team is generating a ton of leads, but sales isn't accepting them or qualifying them because the lead quality is off or it's not aligned. The third, which this is the one where I've, in my experience, have seen massive revenue leakage, is that sales to customer success or post-sale handoff. Sales has closed all of these deals and we're not able to implement them. Customer success isn't able to grow the accounts. And then the last one, which is really important, is just this partnership with finance across the entire cycle. If you are a RevOps professional, you should have a partner in finance that is your best friend. That is my one big advice in all of my executive roles. The CFO has been my right hand. You have to be aligned because they are also looking at this entire revenue life cycle. They're looking at a lot of those metrics, if not all of the metrics Steve just went through. And they're looking at it from a different angle, right? They're probably looking at tops down. They have different considerations because they're thinking about the alignment to maybe the guidance they're going to give to the street, the guidance they're going to give to investors. They're thinking about the alignment to the product and engineering org. And then you're looking at those metrics kind of bottoms down, right? Or bottoms up. And so that kind of partnership is so, so powerful. If you can have a strong partnership there and triangulate what you both see, that's going to pay dividends for you as an individual and your professional growth, but it's also going to pay dividends for kind of ultimately the growth of the company.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned, I know we've got 2 case studies in here. I don't know if we're going to have time for all of them. I don't know if you want to run through both quickly, if you want to pick one to maybe spend a couple of minutes on, but you talked about them in what you just mentioned, Ashmi, with, what can actually happen if you have this product and kind of go-to-market misalignment, and then also what can happen if you have this post-sales, sales and finance misalignment as well.
Yeah, I would suggest, Matt, just for time, we'll send the deck out, but there's a detailed write-up of these in the appendix. So they're great. But if you want to read through and then reach out to Ashmi or me, if you said, hey, I'd like to, bend your ear and learn a little bit more about it. But this, you learn through these war stories about how change was diagnosed and affected and, successfully. And that's exactly the motion you want to do.
Yeah. Well, let's talk through some of the kind of practical tips then for folks to differentiate and excel in revenue operations.
Yeah, so we put this together just, thinking in your shoes, particularly if you're, newish or newer to RevOps, how do you advance it and get it understood as a strategic discipline of your company, and then part and parcel with that, elevate your career as you go. But learn and study your company's revenue cycle. You know how your business works. If you do already, great. But if you don't, map it out, talk to people, have cups of coffee. What do you do, across the function heads? Ashmi mentioned finance. We define 6 core go-to-market teams. It's sales, marketing, service, which everybody knows, but finance, IT ops, and product. So those 6 you should be intimate with, because that's the team you're going to enable and help win on the field. But once you know that and it'll click and that map, that journey map we began with, then you can sort of elevate and look at that and say, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, I can't do it all. There's too many areas that require change, but I need to be able to assess, quantify, and prioritize. And then that becomes your kernels for your RevOps strategic plan, where you're going to focus that you can get buy-in. Talked about the data model. Companies spend inordinate amount of money on consultants and tech firms to come in and build data models. You can do that, at least a crude one. So once you get the cycle, what metrics you're using now, just map those stages, points, whether it's, volume, speed, conversion metrics, but brand your own, right? Come up with your own data model. Don't pay winning by design. They're great, but you can do a lot of that yourself if you roll up the sleeves and do it. Be honest about the strengths and weaknesses of the metrics. Just because it's data doesn't mean it's right. We all know that, but you've got to form a view by talking to CS. Do you believe this retention number? Finance, just get the inputs and then you make your own decision. Hey, it's sufficient, it's B+ or better, or this data is not accepted, doesn't have integrity, so we're not going to report it or use it. But that can be a governing filter because you don't want to get stuck, in a meeting with, no, I don't agree with the underlying assumption, therefore the actions you're proposing. Just bypass that swamp if possible. Start to use ROI. So once you diagnose your business, prioritize. Here's the 15 things we can do. Here's the 3 I think we should do. Why? Because they're gonna cost the least to do. They're the most feasible, and they're gonna have the biggest impact. Everyone agree? Great. And that becomes your, strategic RevOps agenda. Socialize. You cannot do anything without a coalition of the willing. So once you're off and people start to say, great, here's my benefit, here's how it helps my team, helps with my number, helps me with my compensation, I'm fully supportive of you going to make this happen, but just make sure you have that. Educate, communicate, get buy-in. There's a concept in here about a pre-mortem. So change is hard. So where could this get screwed up? Where could it fail? Why? Know what those are and have a emergency plan in case you do encounter that situation. Could be controllable, uncontrollable things, market conditions, but resistance from a team, insufficient data, bandwidth. But that thinking will shape your where do I try to affect change and where do I geesh. The probability here is just a little hard, and there's too many conditions that have to go right for me to be successful. So factor that in. And the last year point on AI, I mean, it's great that people sort of either are embracing it because they're not worried about that embracement, but just know that there's someone in the boardroom that is saying, CEO, how do we reduce headcount through AI? And you should know the answer to that, not the headcount, but what can I do? What are the things I'm doing now or my team's doing now that we could automate proactively and then free up that time to be able to go add more value to the business? It's a very healthy thing, and AI is very ripe. It'll get its footing and, get through these initial use case, successes and failures. But when you look at that revenue cycle and you understand it and you say, how can we do it better, faster, cheaper, with less risk? Once you understand those processes, AI is sort of like this epiphany aha that, oh, that's a great place to use AI to do that. And we're starting to see more companies sort of get to that paradigm shift about how to really get benefit from AI and deploy it right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the math of growth that you mentioned, Steve, is huge. Speaking the language of finance is really the way that you start to advance in your career, that you move up to the C-suite, you move up to the executive level. And so understanding that and being able to tell people, here's how, here's what the top line impact of these things will be, here's the bottom line impact, being able to have the financial acumen, that's a great way to move up. And I think actually, Steve, that's like we talked about our certification, we have a link to it up here. I think you kind of have a module on the math of growth and that specific sort of concept, right? In the 2 certifications, I think, that we have available.
Yep. It teaches all the math, accounting, change management, project management. It's sort of a business toolkit. It's not technical RevOps, how to do lead enrichment, but it is an MBA, condensed MBA for you to have the skills, business skills and knowledge to think like the C-suite, think like the head of marketing, think like the head of CS in order to affect the change that they want, and will show that you got the chops to do this stuff at an executive level.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we are at time. So while I am not currently on camera, if you can still hear me, and I think you can, I can see everybody moving yet at least, I will let you all run. So Steve, Ashmi, thank you very much for dropping some knowledge on everybody today. To all the attendees out there, thank you for joining as well. But that is all that I have for you. So I will let you all run. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you all next time.